The following is a preview of a Patreon exclusive.
All right, let's get to it then. Let's
Well,
talk
I
about
gotta
the
wait before we do.
Oh gosh,
I got
here we
something
go.
that's not in the show notes because I didn't want to spoil it.
But
Today,
you gave me the show notes literally like 30 seconds before we came on air, so
it
there's
was
no
25,
spoiling.
but thank you. You're very generous. Today we're recording this on February 15th, 2023.
Right.
And today is the anniversary, the birth date of Dark Forces, which came out on the PC back on this day, back in 1995. And it's coincidentally, we're going to be talking a lot about Dark Forces because a lot of the stuff that we're pulling is directly from that Dark Forces game. And I just want to quickly say that may have been one of the very first games I ever bought that was for the PC and Star Wars related. I can't remember if I bought TIE Fighter and X-Wing when they first came out or I got them like afterwards. But this one for sure, I remember going in on that day and buying it and playing the heck out of it. Like it was just everything I'd ever wanted in a Star Wars game, you know?
I mean, it was such a great first-person shooter. It was just so
Yeah.
much fun. I mean, and you got to run and gun. I mean, it was so exciting. I can't remember if it was that one or I know it had to have been that. I had another PC game too. That was it Rogue Squadron, I believe.
Mhm. Oh yeah, that was
It was a mix of piloting game and also some first-person shooter, but it was kind of standoffish from the back.
It was on rails and they had a lot of like FMV baked into it, grainy FMV.
It had great music though, and all the sound effects and everything were all there. But yeah, Dark Forces, and then of course the Jedi Knight games that came later on.
Shortly after, yep.
Yeah, those were like Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast is still one of my all-time favorite PvP games, like from that era.
Yeah. So happy Dark Forces Day. It's a great game. I think you can get it on Steam. I think you can still play it there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they have all the old Lucas games backlog.
Yep.
Or Lucas
I recommend it. It's a fun, I mean, nothing's canon at this point. It's all made up, but it's just interesting to see some of the stuff that surfaced in that game and has now kind of made it full circle into canon in a roundabout way. But again, we'll talk about more here in just a little bit. All right. Well, enough of that. Let's get into this discussion about who the believers are. So I thought we could start with just the lines, and this is almost going to be kind of like a detective mystery kind of thing that we're trying to solve, because I think there's some things in his dialogue that certainly give us clues as to who he is and what he was doing. He was on screen for a total of like 57 seconds without his helmet on. That's, to be fair. Like I didn't.
Oh, this is just the scenes with Rex then.
This is just scenes with Rex because it was really only. I mean, prior to that, it was just a figure.
It was only when he was alive, right? Not when he was dead.
Yeah, not when he was dead, or not when he was kind of up in the rafters or whatever, shooting down at them. I didn't count all that, but
so only beginning when he was pouting after being taken out and then being a little smart aleck to Rex.
Then killing himself. Yeah. So Rex says, "Fine, tell me whose orders you're following. I'll let you go." His first line is, "No, you won't, Captain Rex." So, okay, so let's just take this quick line. There's not a lot here, but is it safe to say that he at least knows who Rex is, but is there any chance that he actually worked with Rex, like a Slick, or I know people were asking like Dogma, I think we had talked about that on the main shows. Maybe that was one of them, but do you think there was any chance that he was part of the 501st or had any kind of contact with Rex prior to this moment?
I'm going to go with probably not. I mean, it's totally possible. I mean, you can go in 1,000 different directions with this, but I think Rex was so well known though. And I think that goes to the point where if we were to ask the question whether or not this clone trooper was brainwashed or something like that, that seems to suggest that would be a no, right? Because he remembers Rex in that way. And again, with some of the lines that we're going to say here in just a minute, it just seems to suggest that and really reinforce that, like, this is someone who is of their right mind and they truly do believe in what they're doing. And he remembers Rex, whether he's in 501st or not. Rex would probably have recognized on some level like some of his brothers there. I mean, I guess it's possible he wouldn't, but I mean, again, no markings, no number, nothing like that. But this all seems willingly done.
Yeah, and I would agree. Like I got the sense that even after a few watches, I watched this scene at least 70 times, which is not impressive because that was only 35 minutes. I'm kidding. I didn't, or 70 minutes. Or math is wrong. But no, in all seriousness, there's the more I watched it, the more I kind of got the vibe that, okay, he probably just knew who Rex was because he was such a prominent figure in the Clone Wars. that I don't think he would have worked with him. Plus, you would think that Rex, I mean, I know they all look the same and he had no like identifiable markings or whatever, but you would think Rex probably would have remembered him or maybe not. I don't know.
But again, there were millions of clone troopers. So just to be a devil's advocate, I mean, there were millions of clone troopers, and the
Yeah.
501st was pretty large as well. And they had ranks continuing to come in and out as they were killed or as they were redeployed or as they split the squad. So I guess it's plausible, though, that Rex wouldn't know everybody by name, although that seems unlikely given a character like Rex. He
Mhm.
probably knows most of his squad or most of his, like the entire unit.
Or would
I think
want
it's,
to. Yeah.
or he'd want, yeah. So, but I think it's entirely plausible that it's maybe not reasonable for him to know everybody
Sure.
and have to ask their names from time to time, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm with you. I don't think he worked or reported up to Rex in any way, but I think he just knows who he is because of his reputation, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
because it is interesting. Like if you go back to the Umbara arc from Clone Wars, this is
mhm.
one of those where you could sense like the way that he responds to him. You could almost say there's that bitterness and holding a grudge against Rex for something like what happened with what was the Jedi's name? Drawing a
Krell,
blank here.
Pong Krell.
Yeah, with Pong Krell, right? I mean, he might hold that against him or any of those other, the sins of what he committed and
Mhm.
some of those things. So I mean, you could go that angle too and say, no, he really was. He does know who he is. Well, he was with him, even if he doesn't know who that guy was.
Yeah. We'll come back to Dogma in a little bit, and specifically that the Umbara arc is, I think it makes sense when we start talking about the ideology, right?
See, and I
And
don't know if Dogma would make sense specifically, but anybody else that witnessed the event, to me, was always a little bit more powerful. Dogma would be a little toe in the nose, I think. But
yeah,
yeah,
no, for sure. Yeah, I don't think it's Dogma.
and well, and Dogma kind of came around to understand what was going on
Yeah,
too.
because I mean, he took the final shot, didn't he?
Right?
Isn't he the one that killed Krell?
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, I think he saw the light. But it's just that ideology that I want to get into the extremism of that, and he was
Sure.
kind of like a precursor to what I think we're seeing here, right? So the next line he says is, "You're fighting the wrong battle, brother." Now I couldn't tell whether he was trying to be sarcastic in this in saying that, right? Sarcasm coming from the word brother, or sarcasm in just the in what he's saying, like the meaning behind it. But what was your takeaway on that?
It sure felt like it. It felt like he was being sarcastic. That leaning into the word brother when you don't really mean it,
Sure.
right? And again, distinguishing himself in some way, in some factor, of whatever that looks like is really, I mean, it's curious, right? I mean, they're still related, I guess. I mean, they're all still from the same genetic makeup, but
Hmm.
for him to associate that he is something better, he's kind of evolved or become something more than what the rest of his brothers has. You could see, and this is kind of like the rub between the Clone Force 99 guys and the Regs anyway, right? I mean, it's almost that type of feeling, between them, like they're brothers, but they don't want to really kind of have any association with one another and or even admit that they're from the same genetic archetype.
Yeah. Okay. So on that as well, right? It says you're fighting the wrong battle. So is it safe to say that this person or these persons, the believers, would know that Rex is on the other side? And to what, like, I mean, I guess the Empire would know who Rex is. I mean, you have to assume at this point, right? At least if you think that the believer falls under the Empire, right? And he's not some other kind of person or other group, whatever. I mean, that's a far fetch. Then the Empire knows about Rex. They know what he's doing. And yeah, I mean, that's really the question about whether or not he would actually know that Rex is out there and what Rex is doing. Like, is he that is he that in the public or under the radar of the Empire that they know his Rex's operations and his motives and what he's trying to accomplish?
I'm going to say no, because I think that would really cheapen the reveal that we get in Rebels, where Rex has disappeared for all of these years. He's flown under the radar. And it would also diminish his faking of his death with Ahsoka in Clone Wars season 7. I think you don't that quickly afterwards for him to make himself public and known.
Hmm.
Because I think you can almost see the surprise on Rex's face that he was actually called by name. Someone knew who he was. So I think he's still been operating in the shadows. He's still operating quietly, not making a lot of noise. And while we know that Ahsoka, gets outed as being alive in Tales of the Jedi, I think for Rex, I don't think he's quite there yet. So I like the idea that the trooper recognized him,
Right.
but didn't necessarily know that Rex was doing what he was doing. And now he's just kind of calling him out because, again, he's just got this superiority complex now.
Yeah. And then that's kind of how I walked away with it. Everybody, Risk is asking here, Cole, he's saying they think he's dead at this point, right? And that's correct. Everyone thinks Rex is dead because they faked that death in the last episode of the Clone Wars. So I think it was a surprise. I think it was a surprise that when they took that mask off, or when he was conscious again, he looks up and he sees a ghost essentially in Rex. I'm like, it's you, right? And that's
Right.
what prompted him to say, "You're fighting the wrong battle," because why else would somebody be intervening with what he was trying to do from that perspective?
Exactly.
Okay, his next line though is the one that's the next two lines. He's only got two more here. The next one he says, "You're limited," and he just leaves it at that. I don't know that I have a good theory as to what he means by limited, other than, whatever you're doing, the Empire. The way I guess I would take this is, the Empire is going to win at some point, right? And you're limited in you're trying to do and what you ultimately can do. There's just no way to get around it. You're on the wrong. Again, going back to what he said in the first line, the line before this is, you're on the wrong side of the battle. You should be fighting for the Empire versus against the Empire.
Well, and another take from this too is that he's been somehow enhanced and he's been given something unique that the regular clone troopers don't have, and maybe not even a Clone Force 99 has.
Yeah.
So there has been some sort of enhancement going on. Now that seems a bit unlikely at this point, given that he was reporting to Rampart directly. But again, we also know that Rampart will defer to the clones to get the job done because they're so effective, right? Crosshair in particular. So maybe that's not surprising that Rampart would still use, while he doesn't sanction maybe those type of activities that maybe he's been, shot up with or something like that. But he also knows where he can go get people from time to time. And if they end up being a casualty or dying or getting killed, no big deal.
Right. Yeah.
But he also knows that most of the clones will, do what they're told. And again, if he's been reinforced behaviorally or genetically or enhanced in some way, then, again, if they're true believers, if they're fanatical in this kind of way in their loyalty, then it makes a lot of sense that he would go and find those to do it. And there's probably very few of those in particular. So this does seem like a special, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a special breed, I think, of clone.
Yeah, and that the idea that somehow they're better, right? They're unlimited, and I guess is the inverse of his line. That feeds into some of the possibilities that we came up here from Legends, as to what they could be. We'll get into that here in a little bit, about what some of these legendary or Legends troopers had, and some of the characteristics, and some of them have this kind of enhancement in them. So maybe, if they wanted to tie those two together, that certainly would do it. And his last line is a believer, which is the whole crux of this episode, is really try to understand, like, what is it they believe in? What is that ideology? But I do want to table that, because I want to get to the characteristics first, and then we'll come back to the ideology and kind of speak to that. So as far as the characteristics, and what I meant by this is just the physical characteristics, I think there's some things in here that they've done with the character that, may steer us in one direction or another as to who he is, and really what their sole purpose is. Let's talk about the armor first off. Like, it's not a clone trooper like looking armor at all.
Right.
I've seen some people say it looks more Sith like, and I would maybe like Sith masks like a long time ago, pre well, going all the way back to the Old Republic era. Some of them did wear masks that were kind of similar in fashion, but I don't know that it had a really strong feel one way or the other.
The Imperial design kind of leans from that anyway, right? It seems to be heavily influenced by Sith in numerous ways already.
Yeah, I
So
think it
it's
was
that,
originally inspired by the Mandalorians, right?
right.
But
But there's still a lot of, yeah.
but I mean,
again, I
still with
think,
Revans was, I mean, that whole
right,
T visor thing, right? That was all kind of inspired from too as well. It's all kind of coming from that same original source.
right. It was also somewhat droid-like though as well, I thought. Like
Hmm.
some of the design that we've seen from, oh gosh, man, I can't remember all the numbers anymore, but like Zero, was it Zero?
Zero the Hutt,
From, no, not Zero the Hutt.
Zero the Hutt.
Yes,
That guy?
he's dead. It's been a while since you've done that.
Yeah, no, not that guy.
No, the dude from the droid from Mandalorian. I can't remember.
Oh yeah,
I think
no,
it was
yeah.
Zero. Anyway,
It might have
but
been true.
but it had some droid elements too. Just the narrow of the cheekbone, like type of look, the more skeletal in nature, I think.
Yeah.
And I think some of this may have been just trying to bait and switch, thinking this was Crosshair, and then it wasn't, and so it was a little unique take on whatever Crosshairs had. But again, it wasn't really anything like the squad that Crosshair was training though either. This elite, squadron that he ended up, killing part of.
Right. So the armor, it was unique though. I will say that. And the
It
fact
was.
that it was black, I think lends itself again to some of these legend troopers that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. So there might be a connection there. The next one I have is his skills. And I could almost poke holes in this. Like, I don't really feel strongly about this. I put skilled in assassination, but I mean, was he really he missed a lot. Sure, he took some of the targets out, but there were moments there where he wasn't hitting on. And I think that might have been a way to kind of signal that, okay, this isn't necessarily
It's not
Crosshair,
Crosshair, right?
right? But that aside, I'm going to assume he was skilled as an assassin. Why would they send somebody out to do an assassination with a sniper rifle if they didn't feel they were competent or skilled enough? So I think we have to just kind of give them the benefit of the doubt that they actually are.
Well, and he's going up against other skilled combatants as well with the clones.
Yeah.
So I mean, these are guys who are trained to avoid getting killed and to also do killing. So I mean, that he wouldn't be able to take them out so readily. I mean, if you remember, he shot Slip in the back,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I mean, it was Slip, right? I am terrible with names today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Slip.
Slip with a P. Yeah.
Flip with a P.
Right.
There was a Slick. That's not what we're talking about.
Right. No, it's not. That's from Clone Wars. Yeah. So he did get him in the back, and so if you got a one-on-one fair fight, even though he had the high ground, he still was able to get cover and take care and not get killed. So, and they're clever. I mean, he got the speeder bike and was able to take cover and again just continue to avoid it. But you're right, he wasn't the best of shots anyway. Like some of his shots were missing somewhat wildly. So he definitely had some opportunity to go. And to go back to characteristics on the armor, I think the other thing about the armor was interesting, and it's kind of the title card, is that it fits all the way around his head, like all the way up under his jawline. And so it wasn't like a typical helmet that you would take off. It was more, like like a visor, you click the button and it snaps up, right?
Would you say it's more like an environmental suit, maybe?
It kind of felt like it was sealed, right? Maybe
Hmm.
like a Magna seal or something.
Hmm. It's just so coincidental that some of the, again, troopers we'll be talking about had that design in them. And no, I would agree. I mean, I'm glad you picked that up because I didn't even capture that. But yeah, you're right. It does feel like that is a very sealed, airtight container. Again, which then would lead you to think that it's more like suited for harsh environments or, underwater, out in space if necessary, kind of thing. So,
Right.
those type of harsh environments. But more on that later. Okay, so another characteristic, and not necessarily a physical characteristic, but a behavioral characteristic, which I thought was probably the most interesting piece of all this, is that he killed himself at the very end. He used the Star Wars equivalent of a Side 9 capsule or whatever it is that they did, and we saw this in The Mandalorian in season 2. Was it season 2 where the Imperial officer on deck, he did the same thing. He bit down and killed
Right.
himself, and it was a shot kind of thing. It was almost like verbatim. It looked exactly the same. So I don't necessarily want to say there's a direct connection to that, or say that there's in some way that's related. But the ideology behind this, the idea behind I can't be captured, and so because, well, we'll get into that in here. Because he killed himself, I think that would imply that he has information that cannot get out. Right? He can't be interrogated. It's too risky. That could be part of it, or it could be the ideology that I'm never going to be captured. It's just, even if I don't have any information, you're never going to take me because I'm going to serve a higher purpose, which means I'm going to take my life and ascend into some other kind of, be a martyr or ascend into some great. I'm kind of waxing in real life stuff here, but I don't necessarily think the clones are doing that. But the idea that they would take their lives, though.
Yeah, we see it with spies all the time, right? At least in the
Mhm.
movies, where as soon as they're captured, no, they won't give up anything, and they're just trained to say, okay, well, that's the end of the line. If you're captured, we disavow all knowledge of you, right? It's the whole, I don't know, it's the whole 007 type of thing, or the whole Mission Impossible, thing. So if you're captured, doesn't matter, not our problem. You know what to do. Either get out of it, or if there's no clear path out, well, take the ultimate path out and just kill yourself. Sounds like that's just part of the training, though. Is kind of best guess on that one.
Yeah, well, I think the risk would be that they could implicate Rampart, right? That it could lead back to Rampart, and so
Right. And that
because
goes
his
back to
life.
the fanaticism and the loyalty in that regard, to where those are the folks you have to, if you're going to give someone the ability to do that to themselves, you have to make sure they're actually going to go through with it.
Right. Well, that brings up a good question. Like, it gets back to the question of what does it mean to be a believer? Like, what is it that they believe in so strongly that they're willing to take their life? They're not willing to give up somebody like Rampart. It's just a different. It's so different than anything we've ever had. I think with the Clone Wars and certainly the clones themselves. Like even like, and so let me just bring in this. I mean, we're going to talk about a little bit later with ideology, but even like characters like Dogma. Dogma was very similar to Crosshair in that they were, good soldiers follow orders, right? That's really what it was about. Now, did they take it probably a little too far? Yeah, I think he was a little Dogma being a little too happy to fall in line with some very questionable orders that Pong Krell was giving out, right? So he was probably on the fringe of, because a lot of them were pushing back. A lot of the clones were. He just happened to be one that was like, yeah, no, let's do this, whatever. I'll go die for the Empire. I'll go kill whoever you want me to, because I look up to the Jedi, and those are my superior officers. And so if they tell me to do something, I'm going to do something, even if this guy is shady. I think with Anakin in the 501st, it was like no question, right? Everybody's going to want to fall on a sword or take a bolt for him. But suddenly this guy comes in, he's got no experience with them, but yet he still falls in order and still has the same level of fanaticism. Again, talking about Dogma, still has that same level of fanaticism until the very end when he did come around. This is an extension of that. This is someone who just again, the next level of that. And I don't understand. Well, we'll talk about it. I don't understand what's driving the fanaticism there, why it's driving them to really feel like they are truly believers. And what are they believing in?
Yeah.
This is just the Empire.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it goes back to when we think about the concept of the episode, like what was the premise of the episode of what's the premise of the senator fighting for them? And it's this identity for the clones. And so I think maybe as we go through some of this, we'll come back around to that conversation of saying maybe this is just an identity thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like they are given a purpose. They have a purpose. We hear the passion. I want to be a soldier. I mean, you just expect him to say, damn it, and hit the table all at the same time, right? And just make a huge emphatic demonstration of how passionate he is and how it's just at his core. And he's not alone. And I think some of these guys have been given this opportunity, and whatever that opportunity might actually be, whether it's just a second chance or an actual physiological enhancement or something that's done, giving them this opportunity to do something more and to be something better and to really, remove the chains and remove this limit that he talks about with Rex.
The last thing I have in characteristics is really kind of about their appearance. Now, it's clear that they're clones, right? I mean, they look like it. They look like. I have a question about whether you feel like, are they clones that have been around? I mean, not first generation, of course, but maybe clones that were generated prior to the Empire taking over. Or another theory been tossed around is, are they clones that have been generated here recently, like let's say in the last 6 months? And we've got Nala Se, who was taken off at the very end of season 1. Is she in Tanis? Has she created some new breed of clones that don't have these IDs or any kind of identification, and they're being bred to be fanatics and be so fanatical about the Empire and be completely loyal to the Empire? That seems so different than where Rampart's going, where he's trying to get away from that, though. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
there's a disconnect there for me too.
Yeah, it's really hard to answer that question because we just don't. I mean, gosh, we just don't know, and there's so many unknowns within the context of kind of where you're going with that. I mean, what, it doesn't make sense for them to continue making clones. Maybe Nala Se is working for someone else without Rampart's knowledge. That doesn't make any sense because Rampart's finding them and hiring them.
Mhm.
So you could poke holes in a lot of this stuff, but I think again, it is gosh, man, is this a program? But it's so difficult to tell because you can't. We have a really hard time seeing and differentiating ages between the clones about whether or
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
like the only time we really know the difference is when one of the characters says,
Hey,
they're a
you're
Gen 1 or they're a whatever
Omega.
or I mean, yes, Omega is very different. Yeah, I guess she's the one that said it.
No,
She
she's the
can,
one that. Yeah, she was like,
yeah,
she's
she's the
able to
one that,
identify them. Yeah.
right. Yeah, so that's kind of unique and interesting, and it would have been curious to see if she would have had a context on that because I'm with you. I'm kind of like, are these the newer ones? Because to me, these seem like they would be younger, younger batches. They have this belief system, but again, it also makes sense for there to be one of the older ones
Right.
who is maybe at the end of that lifespan. Now, granted, if it was an older clone, then perhaps they'd have a lot more scars, like we tend to see with some of the other clones. They seem to wear that age a little bit more, and they have to have the battle scars, like real, like physically battle scars,
Mm-hmm.
to show that they've been around for a while. But it's kind of an interesting question because you can take it a couple of different ways. Although you could probably just end up in the same place at the end of the day with whichever direction you want to go.
So I think if it's an older clone, like let's say it's a one that's pre-Empire, then I think the ideology or the motivation behind them being believers is really all about identity. We were bred to be warriors, soldiers, and
Right.
now we're in this transition period where people are trying to get rid of us. We're being, you know, supplanted by other these conscripted soldiers that are coming in. So now where does that leave us? And this has been a main theme of the clone of Bad Batch, right? Ever since season one, we've seen them struggle with, okay, the war is over. What do we do? And now they're taking oddball jobs and doing those sorts of things. But you've got to have people, and this kind of mirrors reality, right? We've talked about this many times in the show. When soldiers come out of war, they have a hard time readjusting to civilian life because that they've never been really. I mean, they've lived in their very formative years at the ages of 18 and 19 and 20, and they were in the service for 15, 20 years, whatever. As they come out, and they have to rehabilitate to everything that's going on. This is a totally different lifestyle than they've ever lived, and a lot of them struggle with that. Right? They go into post depression. They have a hard time trying to identify with other people, and so they all of that probably is an extreme of what we're seeing here. But we know from again the Bad Batch themselves, and certainly what we saw in this past episode, where these clones are like, no, we're soldiers. Like we want to fight. We should be fighting. We don't want to be, given pensions and going and doing, civilian type things. And so for some folks, I mean, if you breed a million of these things, even at 0.01%, you're probably going to have some crazies in there, right? Some people that are just really fanatical and do not want to go to that lifestyle. And these may be the right pickings for somebody like the Empire to come in and say, okay, we got a better job for you, and we're going to enhance you. We're going to give you purpose again and meaning, but it may be a little shady, right? But to them, it's like, hey, I'm going to follow the Empire. This is what I do. So I think that would explain an older trooper. Any additional thoughts on that, or agree, disagree?
No, I think that's kind of where I'd go as well.
Yeah. Now with the newer ones, I think you were kind of hitting the right thing too. Like, I don't know that they have outside of like, ooh, we're the Empire and we're no longer, they don't even associate themselves with the Grand Republic Army anymore. Right?
Right.
They are truly galactic Empire, and that's who they believe in. They believe in Palpatine and Rampart and Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader and all those iconic heroes, if you will, of the Empire. Maybe they believe in that, right? It's like they were the strongest. And so they want to align with the strongest and they want that strength to continue. And they're going to do whatever they can to ensure that strength continues. So that could explain why too, like to kind of just lead into the next characteristic piece, which is still part of the clones, is that there was no ID. And so you could take that as either they had an ID and that was wiped, or they were just made without one, right? Because they were a newer batch.
Well, and it seems like, I mean, they use the word wiped, and I would like to think that that was probably, I mean, while, seemingly impossible, it seems like that would be a very intentional behavior to do. Everything is, I mean, the irony with that is that they are all numbered. Even stormtroopers are all numbered, right? So it is really confusing that you would not have a number, because even spec ops and things like that for the clones, I mean, during the Clone Wars, even during the Empire, they still had a number. And so I think this is very much supposed to be just a complete dark ops, spec ops type of clone that they can just eradicate and just, it never existed. If they're captured or anything else, like you said, they just have no trace back to what they're doing, which I think is where you start to say Nala Se comes into play, right? Because if there was
Right.
anyone that would be able to do that and figure it out, if he was an existing clone, not new or anything like that, but
Mm-hmm.
was still raised through the the cloning batch system, which he's of the age that seems like he's made sense, like that they'd be able to expedite his age that quickly in the last year.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem realistic, right?
Right.
Because we knew it still took a few years for the clones to come of age. But Nala Se would be the one that would be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so if you were able to do them and experiment on them and do some extra things with them, then, and again, there's a program like in Legends that is feeding into canon a little bit now that seems like a very plausible scenario for that type of situation. And now, is it a younger clone? No, not really in the Legends, but I think that's one that starts to pick up a little bit of steam. But
Mm-hmm.
does start to lean back towards what is going on Tantus. What else is going on Tantus? It's not just one thing, but is this a byproduct of what's going on there as well?
Okay, so then let's talk about I guess some of the so we've kind of narrowed it down to 4 possibilities, and there could be more, right? There's certainly, it's so ambiguous. We don't really have a lot, but based on what we've already talked about in terms of the characteristics and what we know from his lines and what we've inferred from that, I think we've kind of narrowed this down to 4 possible clones, and most of these are legends. I think I think they really technically all are
I
legends.
think they're all technical legends. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's start with the clone Shadow Trooper. And there is a Shadow Trooper that came out in canon, which was really kind of it was canon, but they were leaning heavily on this clone Shadow Trooper for that as well. So I don't want to talk about the canon when we're talking about legends here.
Hey everyone, it's Jonesy. We hope you've enjoyed this preview of the Patreon episode. If you'd like to listen to the episode in full, we invite you to head over to cantinacast.com/Patreon. Access to this episode begins at the $2 After Dark tier. If you're interested in joining a future Patreon episode, we encourage you to check out our Now Part of the Tribe and Delusions of Grandeur tiers. You can find all the details at cantinacast.com/Patreon. On behalf of Albert and myself, thank you all for your continued support, and may the Force be with you.